This is the kind of rap story that looks funny on the surface, but the deeper you go, the uglier it gets. Because this is not really about one Instagram post, one troll session, or even one album rollout gone sideways. This is about what happens when an artist with one of the biggest boss personas in hip-hop drops a project that is supposed to feel triumphant, only for the entire internet to start treating the release like an autopsy before the first week is even over. And once 50 Cent caught the scent of that weakness, you already knew what time it was. He was never going to let Rick Ross breathe through this quietly. He was going to turn the numbers, the jokes, the features, the business talk, all of it, into a public execution. So now the real question is not whether Rick Ross got clowned. We all saw that. The real question is whether Rick Ross is surviving this moment by controlling the narrative, or whether this is one of those moments where the narrative has already escaped the artist and started writing itself. Because when you strip away the memes, the fan wars, and the usual social media circus, what happened here is actually a brutal case study in modern rap optics. Rick Ross came into this release with a very specific image. He is supposed to be untouchable. He is supposed to be the luxury rap architect, the heavyweight boss, the man who can always lean back on status, wealth, experience, and presence. Rick Ross is not supposed to look vulnerable. Rick Ross is not supposed to look like the internet got to him. Rick Ross is definitely not supposed to look like the album conversation got hijacked by people counting streams, calculating projections, and laughing before the first week scoreboard even locked in. But that is exactly where the story went, and once that happened, 50 Cent stepped right into the opening like he had been waiting for it. And let's be honest, if you know anything about the history between these two, none of this was surprising. 50 Cent has built an entire second career out of spotting moments where somebody is exposed, embarrassed, slipping, or trying to act stronger than they really are. That is where he is at his most dangerous. He does not need to beat you in a lyrical battle in that moment. He does not even need a long speech. He just needs a weak point, a screenshot, a bad projection, a clip that makes you look defensive, and then he builds the joke from there. That is what he did here. Early conversation around Set in Stone centered on disappointing chart expectations, disappointing stream chatter, and a wave of posts questioning whether the release had real momentum at all. Reports circulating this week said the album was tracking below the Billboard 200 Top 20, with trade coverage and hip-hop outlets describing the outlook as underwhelming. Once that framing settled in, 50 Cent began posting and mocking the situation publicly, turning Ross's rollout into content for the audience instead of a win for the artist. That is where this story starts to get cruel, because there is a difference between an album underperforming and an album being publicly branded as a punchline. A lot of projects come out and do less than expected. That alone is not unusual anymore. The streaming era has broken attention into 1,000 pieces. Veteran artists do not move like they did in 2010. Even younger artists with big social media footprints can struggle to turn headlines into real consumption. But when an album underperforms and also becomes a communal laugh line, that is when the numbers stop being numbers and become symbolism. And that symbolism is devastating for someone like Rick Ross, because his entire image relies on command. Rick Ross can be controversial. Rick Ross can be polarizing. Rick Ross can even be out of step with parts of the current era. But Rick Ross is never supposed to look small. And this is where 50 Cent understood the assignment better than almost anybody watching. He did not just mock the album. He mocked the contradiction. He leaned into the idea that Rick Ross had a giant presentation, a huge personality, a feature-heavy release, multiple businesses, endless boss talk, and still could not force the music to hit with the public at the level expected. That was the pressure point. The joke was not just that Set in Stone might have missed expectations. The joke was that all of the machinery around Rick Ross still could not manufacture the aura of an event. That is much harder to recover from, because once people start feeling like the moment was artificially inflated, every boast starts sounding like a cover-up instead of confidence. And to be fair to Rick Ross, some of the conversation around this rollout got messy fast. Viral posts threw around different numbers, different projections, different stream counts, and the usual exaggerated language that social media uses when it smells weakness. One screenshot says one thing. One blog says another. One reaction channel pushes the most humiliating version possible because humiliation travels farther than precision. But in a weird way, accuracy stopped being the real battle the second the narrative hardened. Once enough people believe the album is struggling, and once enough creators build content around that belief, the exact decimal point matters less than the emotional outcome. People start repeating the vibe. And the vibe around Set in Stone this week was simple. Something about this release did not connect the way Rick Ross needed it to. Now here is where Rick Ross deserves some credit, because his response was not total panic. He did not walk out looking defeated. He did not give the audience the kind of collapse clip that would have fed the machine even harder. Instead, Rick Ross did what veteran artists with durable egos often do when the numbers conversation turns ugly. He changed the battleground. He shifted away from the scoreboard and toward experience, taste, consistency, real fans, and the purity of the music itself. He leaned into the idea that he makes records for people who actually care about bars, production, replay value, and a certain grown man standard in rap. He praised the people showing up in person. He highlighted the fans who came out to see him. He talked like someone trying to remind the audience that there is still a human relationship between artist and listener that exists beyond whatever number a page posts on a Tuesday. And strategically, that is not the worst move in the world. In fact, it may have been his only playable move. Because what else was Rick Ross supposed to do? He could not fake huge numbers into existence by talking louder. He could not outjoke 50 Cent in the middle of 50's preferred arena. He could not suddenly become the underdog in some humble, stripped-back way, because Rick Ross has spent too many years building the opposite identity. So the only path left was to say, in effect, if the internet wants to turn this into a calculator contest, I am going to turn it back into a music conversation. Whether that works is another matter. But as a defensive pivot, it made sense. The problem is that this defense has a built-in weakness. Once you start talking about real fans, genuine support, anti-bot energy, and the deeper value of the music while the public is already laughing at the commercial side, a lot of people hear that as retreat language. They hear it as the speech artists give when they know the scoreboard is ugly, and they need to moralize the loss before the loss becomes official. That does not mean the music is bad. It does not mean the artist is lying about caring about craft. It just means timing is everything, and when that message arrives right in the middle of a clowning cycle, the audience receives it through suspicion instead of sincerity. And that is why 50 Cent was able to keep pressing. He understands that once your opponent is forced into explaining themselves, they are already playing from underneath. Every additional justification becomes material. Every pivot becomes a punchline waiting to happen. Talk about your businesses? He will say you are distracting from the album. Talk about the fans? He will say only family showed up. Talk about the quality of the record? He will say the public voted already. Talk about being rich? He will ask why the money flex appears every time the music gets questioned. This is why so many people hate getting into public mud with 50. He turns your coping mechanisms into the next episode. But here is where I think the conversation gets more interesting than the surface-level ridicule. Because if you step back for a second, this entire episode also says something uncomfortable about the way rap discourse works now. We are in an era where album conversations often become scoreboard arguments before listeners even live with the music. We are in an era where being projected to struggle can become a bigger story than what is actually on the record. And we are in an era where veteran rappers, especially legacy names, are judged against memories of their peak, while also navigating a marketplace that no longer functions anything like it did when they were hottest. So when Rick Ross drops a new album in 2026, he is not just competing with new releases. He is competing with his own mythology, with fan nostalgia, with meme culture, with anti-fan culture, with Drake-era tribalism, and with a content economy that rewards humiliation faster than nuance. That is a brutal environment for somebody like Rick Ross, because Rick Ross has always thrived on perception. Even when people debated his lyricism, his authenticity, or the quality of a particular project, the larger image usually stayed intact. Rick Ross still felt like Rick Ross. The records sounded expensive. The personality felt oversized. The branding felt deliberate. The world around him felt curated. That image can survive a lot. What it struggles to survive is public shrinking. The moment people stop arguing with you as a boss figure and start laughing at you as a relic, the ground changes. You are no longer in a debate about taste. You are in a fight over relevance. And I think that is what made this week sting. Not just the projections. Not just the 50-cent posts. It was the speed with which the public discussion turned from curiosity about set in stone into a referendum on what Rick Ross even is in this era. Is Rick Ross still a meaningful rap event when he drops? Is Rick Ross now mostly a personality and businessman who also releases music? Is Rick Ross grading himself by a different metric than the audience is? Is the fan base still there, but simply not large enough to turn the release into a major chart story? Or did the rollout itself misread the cultural temperature entirely? Those questions are bigger than one album. They go straight to the center of legacy. And there is another layer that made this even messier. The audience that came for Rick Ross was not just neutral observers. A lot of the loudest voices piling on were already primed by older beefs, Drake fallout, anti-Ross sentiment, or simple enjoyment of seeing a larger-than-life figure get dragged back to earth. That matters, because it means Rick Ross was not dealing with a clean release week reception. He was dealing with a shark tank. People were waiting for a reason. 50 Cent's involvement did not create that appetite. He just gave it a ringleader. Once he started posting, the pile-on became socially organized. The joke suddenly had a narrator. And if you want to understand why that narrator matters, look at how 50 Cent weaponizes social proof. He rarely acts like he is making the audience believe something from scratch. He acts like he is confirming what everybody can already see. That is a powerful move because it makes his trolling feel less like an attack and more like a verdict. He enters after the smoke starts rising, points at the building, and says, "See, I told you it was burning." Even when he is exaggerating, that confidence gives the joke a strange authority. And against an artist like Rick Ross, who depends on aura, authority-based ridicule is deadly. Still, I do not think this is as simple as saying 51 and Rick Ross lost. That is the easiest version of the story, but not the fullest one. Because if your definition of winning is dominating the online moment, then yes, 50 Cent absolutely hijacked this conversation. He made himself unavoidable. He turned Ross's vulnerable week into public entertainment. He probably got more engagement out of mocking the album than many people got from discussing the album seriously. But if your definition of winning includes durability, catalog, business life, touring life, and cultural memory, then Rick Ross is not exactly erased because one week got ugly. He is too established for that. The deeper issue is not immediate destruction. The deeper issue is erosion. That is what Rick Ross should really be worried about. Erosion is more dangerous than one embarrassing headline. Erosion is when each new release arrives with less urgency. Erosion is when jokes become the dominant language around your drops. Erosion is when your biggest strengths start sounding recycled because the audience has heard the flex too many times without a fresh, dramatic reason to care. Erosion is when people no longer ask whether the music is great and instead ask whether the artist still matters enough for greatness to even register. That is the cliff veteran rappers fear most, and this week felt like one of those moments where Rick Ross was staring over the edge. At the same time, I do think there is a reason some people still defend the album itself. There are listeners who genuinely prefer Rick Ross in this lane. They like the lush beats, the deliberate flow, the heavier presence, the unbothered boss energy, the luxury crime cinema aesthetic that he has built for years. For those people, Set in Stone is not supposed to compete with the internet's newest obsession. It is supposed to deliver a recognizable Rick Ross atmosphere. And if that is the standard, then some of the audience is going to feel like the mockery missed the point. They are going to say the project was never designed to be some youth wake, only to satisfy fans who still want that mode done at a high level. That defense exists. But even there, the problem remains. Rick Ross himself does not move through the world like a niche legacy act who is content serving a stable core audience. He moves like a mogul who still expects the room to widen when he enters. He markets like a giant. He speaks like a giant. He frames his ventures like a giant. So when the commercial conversation turns small, the contrast is extreme. And people are ruthless with contrast. The higher the image, the harder the laugh when reality seems lower. This is why all the money talk, all the business talk, and all the success reminders landed so strangely during the backlash. On paper, Rick Ross is right. Wealth matters. Ownership matters. Brand partnerships matter. Longevity matters. If an artist has built multiple revenue lanes outside streaming, that is smart. That is something to respect. But in the middle of an album performance argument, those truths do not automatically rescue the music narrative. They can even make things worse, because critics hear them as evasions. The audience is saying, talk to me about whether the release connected, and the artist is answering, I own other things too. Both statements can be true, but they are not addressing the same wound. And then there is the feature conversation, which quietly became another blade in the pylon. When an album arrives with a lot of guests and still struggles to generate the level of event energy expected, the feature list stops looking like a celebration and starts looking like reinforcement that did not hold. Fair or not, people read that as desperation. They ask why so many names were needed. They ask whether the artist trusted his own gravity. They ask whether the collaboration density was meant to inflate the moment rather than sharpen it. Again, maybe that is too cynical. But release week discourse is not built on charity. So where does that leave Rick Ross now? In my opinion, he has 3 separate battles. The first is the easiest, survive the joke cycle. That just takes time. The internet always moves. The second is harder, preserve the image. That requires showing that this moment does not define how he is seen long term. The third is the hardest, prove, on an actual music level, that he can still create a release people feel they need to stop for. Not admire politely. Not stream casually. Need. Because that is what is missing from this entire rollout. Urgency. And the ugly truth is that urgency cannot be purchased with reputation alone. Urgency cannot be manufactured by reminding people what you used to mean. Urgency comes from friction, surprise, sharp music, undeniable moments, or a sense that something is at stake. That is why 50 Cent's attacks landed so cleanly. He made the public feel like there were stakes to watching Rick Ross respond, even if those stakes were humiliating. In a twisted way, 50 created more urgency around the aftermath than the album created around itself. That may be the most painful part of the whole story. Think about how brutal that is. An artist spends time building an album, shaping a rollout, assembling features, promoting the work, and trying to create a moment. Then the most animated public energy comes not from the songs, not from the concept, not from the writing, but from a rival clowning the perceived failure. That is not just bad press. That is narrative theft. The rival stole the event and repackaged it around your weakness. Now, to Rick Ross's credit, he has always had thick skin, and he has survived public turbulence before. He has been doubted before. He has been memed before. He has been counted up before. Rick Ross has built a career partly on the fact that he understands scale better than most rappers. He knows how to present himself. He knows how to create an environment around his name. And he knows how to keep talking like he owns tomorrow even when today gets awkward. That psychology matters. A lot of artists would have looked visibly broken by now. Rick Ross instead chose to project calm, perspective, and pride in the music. But there is a line between resilience and insulation. If Rick Ross reads this entire reaction as just bot talk, fake outrage, or haters doing what haters do, he risks missing the signal buried inside the noise. The signal is not that one rival mocked him. The signal is that too many people were ready to accept that mockery instantly. That means the foundation around the release was weaker than it needed to be. That means the market no longer automatically honors the Rick Ross brand at release week scale. That means future drops may need a different strategy, a different emotional proposition, or a different reason for the audience to care. And let's go even deeper, because I think this is also exposing a generational split in hip-hop fandom. There is one group that still believes artists like Rick Ross should be evaluated in terms of craft, presence, catalog, and whether the music sounds rich, polished, and mature. Then there is another group that treats every release like a public election, where memes, immediate scoreboard optics, and rival reactions matter more than album texture. If you are in the first camp, the reaction to Set in Stone may feel shallow and disrespectful. If you are in the second camp, Rick Ross walked straight into the modern reality and got punished by it. Both perspectives are active at once, which is why this story feels so loud. And 50 Cent, of course, understands the second camp perfectly. He is fluent in public spectacle. He knows that humor beats argument online. He knows that a single mocking post can redirect more attention than a paragraph of serious criticism. He knows people enjoy seeing confidence tested. And he knows Rick Ross is one of the best possible targets for this formula, because Ross's identity is so grand that any hint of slippage becomes inherently entertaining. The mighty do not just fall. They echo. So when people ask whether Rick Ross handled it the right way, I think the honest answer is, maybe as well as he could, but not well enough to fully reverse the frame. His message to core fans probably helped stabilize the people already inclined to support him. His refusal to act shattered probably prevented worse optics. His insistence on the music rather than the projections probably reminded some listeners to go judge the album for themselves. All of that matters. But none of it truly erased the dominant image of the week, and the dominant image of the week was 50 Cent laughing while the internet kept score. That is the image Rick Ross has to beat now. Not with a rant. Not with another wealth montage. Not with a defensive explanation. With a moment. A real one. Because if the next chapter looks too similar, this week will stop being a temporary embarrassment and start becoming accepted evidence in a larger decline narrative. And once rap audiences feel like a decline story has been proven, they become merciless. Every future number gets filtered through that lens. Every rollout becomes prejudged. Every flex becomes easier to parody. So no, I do not think Rick Ross is finished. I do not think one ugly rollout deletes a major career. But I do think this week exposed the exact pressure point that his critics will keep attacking. They're going to question whether Rick Ross can still command the room musically without leaning on legacy, lifestyle, or the larger myth around him. And until Rick Ross answers that question with something undeniable, every troll, every projection screenshot, and every joke from 50 Cent is going to keep sounding louder than it should. And maybe that is the real lesson here. In rap, wealth can protect your life. Status can protect your ego. Catalog can protect your legacy. But none of those things automatically protect your moment. A moment is fragile. A moment belongs to whoever controls the audience's emotion in real time. This week, the audience's emotion was not awe. It was amusement, disbelief, mockery, curiosity, and a little bit of schadenfreude. That is why Rick Ross lost control of the release week conversation, and that is why 50 Cent looked so comfortable stepping on the scene. He understood the audience's mood before Rick Ross could redirect it. Now I want to hear from you, because this is where the debate gets good. Was 50 Cent exposing a real problem with Rick Ross's place in the current rap landscape? Or did the internet simply choose blood over music and make the album a target before it ever had a fair shot to breathe? Did Rick Ross make the smartest possible pivot by talking to true fans and standing on the quality of the project? Or did that response accidentally confirm the exact weakness people were clowning in the first place? And bigger than that, what matters more in 2026 for an artist like Rick Ross? The numbers, the narrative, or the music itself? Drop your take below, because this is the kind of story where the comments are going to say as much about rap fans as they do about Rick Ross and 50 Cent. And if you want more breakdowns where we separate the joke from the real damage, stay locked in, because this story is probably not done embarrassing somebody yet.